What's going on, everybody? Gentleman94 here. Welcome back to another episode of Sci-Fi Wednesdays, guys, and we are back on the Battlestar Galactica Viper Mark VII. And just to go ahead and recap from last time, we have a completed Viper Mark VII for the most part. We don't have any of the guns on it, but we do have the fuselage put together. The top and bottom halves of the wings are all together. We've got the rear stabilizer, the engines put together, the cockpit, pilots painted up. So we're looking actually pretty good. And today I wanted to go ahead and kind of get this ready for paint. Go ahead and start prepping certain areas. As you can see, we're going to be sanding down certain areas here, sections that need a little work. Need to do some filling, so I'll work a little bit with some Mr. Surfacer for some putty. And just generally, just going to get this ready for paint and run it down with some very fine grit sandpaper. Make sure this is nice and smooth. And the next episode, hopefully, we're going to go ahead and get some color on this guy. We have to figure out what color to use too, because I don't really want to use the Model Masters color they call out for, because, well, I don't like using enamels. I like using acrylic. So we'll have to see what we can come up with. Might have to mix a few paints to get that perfect shade of Viper blue. But anyway, guys, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about what's been going on. I actually missed last week. Last week I did not have an episode on Wednesday, and the reason for that is there was some construction going on at my apartment, and I actually didn't have an opportunity to sit down and record anything or do any modeling. So unfortunately, we're an episode behind. But not a big deal, because I'm back here, back in the apartment. We have most of the stuff kind of taken care of. We have our modeling desk here for us, and we're going to be finishing up the Viper. I'm also looking at doing a little bit more work on both the recce build for the P-38 and also for the F-105. I'm in the process of finishing up the F-105, doing some attempt at weathering. But this one here is pretty much getting there to paint pretty soon, and I'm having a good time building this one, so I'm just kind of sticking with what's going, what's working. Also, last episode, kind of off camera, I filled these two little sections back here where the top and bottom half of the fuselage kind of meet. There was a pretty substantial gap there, so what I did is I took a little strip of styrene and I just glued it in there, kind of wedged it and just dropped some plastic welder in there. And I'm going to go ahead and just shave that off. Just go ahead and get that flush. I'm going to have to take a sanding stick to it, or maybe a jeweler file or something, but that's pretty standard. I know in cases like this I'd rather not have a seam and rather not have any sort of filling or patching, but I didn't have much choice in the matter. The overall fit for this kit is decent. I mean, there's a couple of issues here and there that I think probably could have been avoided had I been a little bit more careful and worked a little slower in certain areas when assembling the top and bottom half of the fuselage. But for the most part, it's a decent fitting kit. There are some inaccuracies, the gun pods, for example, and I'll talk about that a little later toward the end of the video. But also we have issues with the wings. There are supposed to be intakes in the wings, and for some reason there's a molded section of plastic that sticks out, kind of covering over one of the intakes, and that doesn't make any sense why they would be there. So, a couple little issues there. Like I said before, cockpit is really, really Spartan. You basically get nothing in there. And so I've kind of redone that. We saw that last episode. Everything else, though, decent. I gotta say, decent fit, decent look. I mean, it looks like a Viper Mark VII, so, I mean, what more do you want, really? So I'm just going to take some more of these jeweler files. I'm just going to kind of work and go along with different sections and kind of clean up some of the panel lines, some of the, end-to-end connections that we have here. And just get this ready for the next step, which will be kind of go back in and hit it with a little bit of Mr. Surfacer. So let's go ahead and get this all doctored up and ready to go. And that is really the most important thing, is you want a nice finish. If you have a good finish on your overall aircraft, or in this case, spaceship, you're going to be able to achieve a very, very nice paint job. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do here. It's my goal. So, as I said before, there are a few little issues here and there with some fit, especially around the top and bottom half of the fuselage, the joint that runs on the underside of the wing. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little bit of Mr. Surfacer and we're going to kind of wedge it in there. I don't want to fill the gap. I just want to make it less pronounced, because there was supposed to be a panel line there. It's just right now there's this big cavernous ditch. So I don't want that. Instead, I want to have a nice kind of shallow trench. So that we're going to have to definitely tackle that. Before I get to that, though, I wanted to go ahead and clean up the leading edge of this intake. Because of the top and the bottom half kind of joint area right here, it's a little bit of a problem with the fit right here. So I'm going to take my jeweler file and I'm just going to kind of round out the area and just kind of flatten it out. Also, the front section of the wing, the very, very front section is actually molded to the nose. Why that is, I have no idea, but that's the way it is. So I want to go ahead and use a jeweler file and very carefully kind of file that down and kind of fare that into the rest of the wing. So right here you can see again this large trench-like area. So I'm going to use some Mr. Surfacer. I have three different, I guess, viscosities. I have 500, 1000, and 1200. 1200 is really, really thin, so I'm going to actually use the 1000. 500 is just too thick. I don't need 500 for this. I use 500 for more stippling effects on like cast turrets and things, like for Russian tanks. And just going to mix this bad boy up. We're also going to use a technique that I saw on a website called Swami's Models, and it's been floating around, and I've seen it other places here on YouTube as well, where you actually take a piece of tape. In this case, I'm using my my Tamiya masking tape, and we're going to actually kind of mask off the sections we don't want any of the filler to kind of reach. Here, we're just going to lay it down, make sure that we don't allow any of the filler agent to kind of squeeze in underneath the mask. That would be bad. And plus, there's also a technique that I learned too, where you kind of spread out the filler by using a Q-tip and a little bit of nail polish remover. That's worked really well with squadron white putty. I'm not so sure how it's going to work here with Gunzy, but we're going to give it a try. And let's go ahead and check out the surfacer here. This is, like I said, the 1000 grit. And so we're going to use a little piece of styrene, dip it in there. And almost like a trowel, we're just going to basically just kind of trowel it on. We don't have to be too careful with how much we get on the tape because we're going to pull the tape off anyway, so that doesn't really matter. I'm going to work right on down this tape line all the way to the other side. There we go. And I mean, I'm no expert at using putty. I very rarely use it. I try not to have any gaps. That's kind of the best thing to do is use plastic welder, get those seams really, really together. But in this case, it's not exactly as well fitting as I'd like it to be. Just a little bit there. There we are. Now I'm going to kind of draw it from the tape out to the leading edge. Now I'm going to put a little bit on the front nose here so you can see a comparison between what it does when you have the tape and when you don't have the tape. So I'll take a little bit of this and just drip it up here on this joint as well. This should work pretty well though. I mean, to be honest, either tape or no tape, there's not a lot that I'm putting on here. So it should work out alright. There we go. And a little bit more. Looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and give this a little bit of time to kind of tack up and dry a bit. And then we'll be back and we'll continue the next steps. So basically I have some nail polish remover and I have a Q-tip. And I'm just going to draw the Q-tip moistened in the nail polish remover just right down the area that I just recently masked and filled. And what that's going to do is, in theory, it's going to somewhat liquefy it and help it to kind of go where it needs to go. And this works a lot better with the Squadron White Putty. Anything with acetone in it usually helps to kind of dilute that. This doesn't work so well with the Gunzy stuff, but it's an experiment. It looks like it works okay. It's not perfect, but I think it's going to work all right. We'll just use a Kleenex here and just kind of wipe this down so we don't have too much of a gloppy effect. There we are. Looks pretty good. Now there are a couple other areas we need to go ahead and work on, being the front side here and the bottom side. There's a couple little other seams I want to go ahead and just kind of slightly fill in. But let me pull off this tape here and you're going to get an idea here of what it looks like with no tape and with tape. So it's tape's off. Hopefully you guys can see this in the camera. But this side here, very clean, very neat. The front side, very messy. So it's going to be a lot more to sand here in the front side because you will have to sand this. You will have to go ahead and kind of give it a couple shots of sandpaper. But not too bad. Okay, so we are back and I went ahead and off camera I filled up a couple little sections here on the wing And I also took some styrene and kind of wedged it in between the top part of the fuselage and the rear engine cover. So yeah, it looks pretty good. I want to discuss here the front thruster ports. It's supposed to have 2 on the side of each fuselage and 4 on the top. Instead, it just had the 4 and didn't have the 2 on either side of the fuselage. So I'm going to use this drill here, and I made a mask actually out of a little piece of styrene using the 4 as kind of a guide. I marked it up and I drilled 2 little holes through it, creating somewhat of a template. And I took that template and I matched it about where it would be in relation to what the pictures I've seen in the online references. Then I went ahead and taped it, and I just barely tapped it with my pin vise. It's got a nice fine tipped drill bit there chucked into the end of that, and that's going to be the same diameter as the other thruster ports. So we're just going to round out those holes, and we're going to add in our missing thruster ports. Now, I've actually seen a couple model kits that were built of this kit that had this done. It looks a lot better, looks more complete. I've seen a couple without them, and it's not that big of a deal really. If you're not going to really notice it too much, who cares, right? But I most likely would notice it, so I want to make sure it's as complete and as accurate as possible. And I'm going to mark it here with this colored pencil so you can hopefully kind of see them. There we go. 2 on the side, 4 on the top, and 2 on the other side. So it looks pretty good. And there's actually another set of 4 on each back part of the wing, and there's also 2 underneath that. And then, of course, a whole cluster in the very back above the engine. So we're going to go ahead and hollow all of those out. Do it off camera so you guys aren't too bored. We'll be right back. Okay, guys, so I'm just finishing up hollowing out the very last section of the thruster ports. This is the one right above the engine cluster. And so far, it actually has turned out pretty well. I did notice, though, this plastic is a lot thinner than the other plastic. So if you do this, just be aware that you might end up accidentally poking through the back of this. So be real careful with how much pressure you put on, because I accidentally did poke through one of them. But it shouldn't be a big deal. I kind of hollowed them out so they look about the same. We'll use this X-Acto knife to kind of scrape off any extra flash that we may have caused. And yeah, that looks pretty good. So we've got all the thruster ports hollowed out, ready to go. And yeah, I mean, I can't complain. Went ahead and sanded everything down too, off camera there, using just some basic tester's sanding paper. Need to actually get some new sanding paper there, but everything looks good. The thruster ports are somewhat hollowed out, so it looks much better. I have the areas here and there that I went ahead and puttied. They're all sanded down and very smooth. And I gave the top section some sandpaper as well. Just kind of went over that with some sandpaper and filled up a couple of little areas that needed some filling with some styrene. The last section we're going to need to go ahead and fool with, which we are going to have to do some thinking on it because it's not quite right, are the guns. You can see here they're molded in a certain way to sit at a certain angle in relation to the wing. The problem is, in every single reference photo, even the box art, the guns are canted in a different angle. They don't run parallel with the slope of the wing. They actually run at an opposite angle of that. So we're going to have to figure out how to go ahead and mount these guns in the proper alignment. Next time we'll come on back, hopefully get those guns installed, prime this sucker, get this guy ready for paint. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm sorry about last week. I really meant to have an episode up, but I wasn't able to get it done. But hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you back here next time on Sci-Fi Wednesdays.